You know, when we pick up a book, we usually think it's a one-way street, right? We read the words, we get the story, and that's it. But what if it's not that simple? What if the text and the history it comes from are actually reading us back? That's the big idea we're driving into today. This revolutionary concept that literature and history are in this constant, dynamic conversation with each other.
So here's our roadmap. First up, we're going to see how people used to read literature in a total vacuum. Then, we'll watch as history strikes back with a whole new way of thinking. After that, we'll get into the wild philosophy that powers it all. See how it applies to pop culture. Yep, your favorite movies and music. And finally, we'll see how all of this gives us a brand new lens for reading the world around us.
Okay, let's kick things off. To really get where we're going, we have to understand where we've been. And for a long time, literary studies was all about reading in a vacuum.
Now, for decades, this wasn't just some hypothetical question. It was pretty much how things were done. Scholars would take a poem or a novel and analyze it by looking only at the words on the page. They'd completely ignore the messy, complicated world, the culture, or the history it sprang from.
This approach was called formalism, and it was the reigning champ for a long time. Theories like new criticism or deconstruction, they all shared this idea that the text was a self-contained universe. They got really into form and structure, and honestly, they kind of looked down their noses at historical context, seeing it as a bit old-fashioned. But this created a real hunger, a hunger to reconnect stories with the real-world social issues that make them so important.
So how did the literary world satisfy that hunger? Well, that brings us to the revolution that happened next. Let's talk about how history struck back with a movement called New Historicism.
Before this big shift, the standard approach was what we now call Old Historicism. I want you to picture a museum diorama. History is that painted backdrop, right? It's stable, it's factual, it doesn't move. And the literary work is the model in the foreground, just sort of reflecting that static background.
And you can see how simple this model was. The arrow just points one way. History, seen as this solid, unchanging set of facts, pours its influence directly into the literary text. The book is basically just a passive mirror, but this whole model was about to get flipped completely on its head.
Enter New Historicism. This approach says, hold on a second. Both history and literature are messy, complex, and uncertain texts. It's not a diorama anymore. It's a live-action conversation. It's like the painted backdrop suddenly walked onto the stage and started arguing with the actors. And this shows the shift perfectly. Look at that double-headed arrow. That's the game changer. The influence flows both ways. A novel doesn't just reflect its time, it actively helps create our understanding of that time. And get this, history isn't one single, stable story. It's a collection of histories, just as open to interpretation as any poem.
Okay, let's make this real with a classic example. You're looking at the opening lines from William Wordsworth's famous poem, Tintern Abbey. He's painting this picture of a wild, secluded scene, a peaceful, natural escape where you can have these deep, profound thoughts. That's the traditional reading we all learned.
And this is the image that goes with it. This painting from around the same time totally reinforces that idea. You've got these romantic, quiet, totally isolated ruins. It's the perfect visual for the poem's vibe. But is that the whole story?
Oh, not even close. A new historicist critic, Marjorie Levinson, did some digging and uncovered the reality of the place. Far from being secluded, it was swarming with tourists and beggars. There was a huge ironworks nearby, spewing pollution into the river. Those picturesque hedges, they were actually fences from the deeply controversial land enclosures that were kicking people off their land and making them poor. The houseless people Wordsworth mentions weren't some poetic idea. They were the real-life victims of this economic crisis. So here's the kicker. The poem isn't just ignoring this reality, it's actively suppressing it. It's building a beautiful illusion right on top of a very ugly social situation.
Now this kind of analysis, this digging beneath the surface to see what's really going on, it's powered by some really potent philosophical ideas. So let's pop the hood and look at the engine behind New Historicism, and that means talking about Michel Foucault.
So, the traditional way of thinking is pretty simple. You get knowledge, and that gives you power. But Foucault just flips that script completely. He argued that it's actually power that produces what a society decides is knowledge or truth. And power isn't just some king on a throne telling you no. It's a much more subtle, all-encompassing system that regulates us, disciplines us, and is always watching us, shaping how we see everything.
Foucault's most powerful metaphor for this is the panopticon. It was a real prison design from the 18th century. You've got this central guard tower, and all the cells are arranged around it. The guards in the tower can see into every cell, but because of the lighting, the prisoners can't see the guards. So the inmates never, ever know if they're being watched at any specific moment.
And that's the genius of it, right? The key is that because you might be watched, you start policing your own behavior all the time. You internalize the gaze of that invisible guard. And Foucault said this is how modern society works. Think about it. From security cameras everywhere to the perfectly curated lives we present on social media, we are constantly self-regulating, always performing according to the unwritten rules of our culture.
Now, ideas this big couldn't stay locked up analyzing old poems forever. They exploded outward to look at all of culture, including the TV shows we binge, the music we stream, and the movies we love. Which brings us to our next section. And this is the exciting world of cultural studies. Thinkers like Stuart Hall came along and argued that, hey, popular culture isn't just mindless entertainment. No, it's a serious battlefield where the politics of our everyday lives get fought over, where meanings are constantly being challenged and redefined.
To help us see this, the critic Raymond Williams gave us these really useful terms. He said that at any given moment, a culture has its dominant forces. These are the mainstream, powerful ideas. But it also has residual forces, older traditions and values that are still hanging around. And, most importantly, it has emergent forces, brand new ideas bubbling up from the margins to challenge the status quo. Culture is never just one thing. It's this constant negotiation between these different layers.
All right, let's try this out. Here's a super famous sonnet from Shakespeare. He seems to be tearing down all those cliché, over-the-top descriptions of beauty that were everywhere in poems back then. You know, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun, black wires grow on her head. On the surface, it sounds incredibly radical, doesn't it?
But a cultural studies approach would dig a little deeper. Is this a truly emergent protest against the dominant beauty standards of his time? Or is he just playing a different but already established literary game? There was a whole tradition of anti-Petrarchian sonnets, and it was a popular way for poets to show off how clever they were. So is he a rebel, or is he just being a different kind of conventional? It shows you that what looks like resistance can sometimes be a lot more complicated.
So, after all of that, from Wordsworth's Abbey to Shakespeare's sonnets and even pop music, what's the big takeaway from this whole intellectual revolution?
Here's the bottom line. These ways of thinking aren't just for stuffy academic papers. They give all of us a critical toolkit. They're like a new pair of glasses that lets us look at a movie, a news report, or even just an advertisement and see the hidden layers of history, power, and culture at work. We can start to spot the dominant stories being pushed on us, and maybe, just maybe, the emergent ones that are being ignored.
And that's the question I want to leave you with. Put on those glasses for a second. Take a look around at your own world. From the way we talk about success to the kinds of stories that get told on the news. What are the dominant stories that are shaping your reality? And even more importantly, what are the emergent ones, just waiting for their chance to be heard?